Welcome to Senadiban Education Foundation again. Actually, we had some technical issues here. We sorted it out. The limit has expired. Now it has been renewed. Welcome to Senadiban Education Foundation. Thank you for your patient waiting. Education is the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. The saying is by Albert Einstein. Actually, we started this education programs way back in 2007. This is actually Professor Antonio Longo, the founder of stapler hemorrhoidectomy, releasing our educational program at Holy Cross Hospital, Kollam. Then we launched the Senadiban Education Foundation way back in 2012 by releasing of a set of educational DVDs. It was released by Professor Seon Han Kim from Korea. Then we started free fellowship programs with the 6 months and 1 year fellowship programs, which are hands-on in basic and advanced laparoscopic surgeries. We used to have contact classes and hands-on training in both dry lab and wet lab. Because of the COVID, last year we started online programs, July 2020. Now it is, today we are finishing 1 year with 40 webinars so far. The logo was released by Professor Palanivelu in July 2020. And then we started having live surgeries in online platform. We had our first live program in Facebook in April 2020. And then we did a lab Whipple in August in YouTube Live. And the link was shared to the members of Senadiban Education Foundation. And we conducted webinars with the world leaders in surgery. Actually, we have 15 WhatsApp groups with more than 250 members in each. And we have got a Facebook group, which is more than 800 members. And the first season, we conducted 28 webinars with these world leaders. And most of the meetings, we have good participations. This is participation in one of the meetings. There are 1,303 participants from more than 56 countries. This is one of the largest virtual platforms in the world. And we have this YouTube channel. Actually, we give all the webinar videos free of cost. And also we have the online teaching programs, live surgeries free of cost. Today we have two eminent people to talk us about cystic tumors of pancreas. Professor Shailesh Srikante, who is the Deputy Director of Tata Memorial Hospital, Bombay, and Dr. Sandeep Nayak, Chief Surgical Oncologist, Mass Clinic and Laparoscopy Robotic Surgery Department, Fortis Cancer Institute, Bangalore. You all know Professor Shailesh Srikante. I am happy that I am honored that he is my friend. Actually, this is his teacher when he got the honorary fellowship in American Surgical Association. Actually, he is the second Indian surgeon to get this fellowship in the 148 years history of American Surgical Association. And this is actually, he is the proud son of the Professor Srikante, and this is his brother-in-law, Anandan Nande. And to introduce the moderator and speaker, we have Dr. Elvis Joseph, who is an oncosurgeon who is working with me. He completed his MCH from St. John's, Bangalore. Now working with me in Mediterranean Hospital, Trivandrum. Before handing over the mic to Elvis Joseph, let me request all the participants to mute their mic on entry. If possible, kindly acknowledge by renaming your device by yours. Participants logging from outside India are requested to reveal their identity in the chat box so that the host can acknowledge them. Raise your hand if you want to intervene between the talk or session. Everybody will be given permission to unmute their mic if they want to speak something after the session. If you are on a portable device, please mute your audio and hide your video. Please mute your mic and hide your video if you are not in a casual dress even. The next webinar is happening on Sunday next week. The webinar is on nutrition support in surgery, myths and facts. It's done by none other than Dr. Adarsh Chaudhary, Chairman, GE Oncology and Bariatric Surgery Institute of Hepatobiliary Sciences and Digestive Surgery, Medanta Hospital, Delhi. And it will be moderated by Dr. Punidhar, Head of the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Rishikesh, India. So you can contact us for the queries and webinar videos at senadivan@gmail.com. I hand over the mic to Dr. Elvis Joseph to share his screen. Dr. Elvis, you can share your screen.
Thank you, sir, Baiju sir, for the kind introduction. It is my privilege to introduce the moderator for the day, that is Dr. Sandeep Naik P. He's a well-known oncosurgeon. Can you hear me, sir? He's a well-known oncosurgeon with over 15 years experience, and he's a director of surgical oncology in Fortis Hospital, Bangalore, and the founder of the Masses Clinic in Bangalore. He's well known for surgical innovations like the RABBIT, that is the robotic assisted breast axillary inflation thyroidectomy technique, and he has introduced that and proliferated that in India. He's also well known for MIND, which is a minimally invasive neck dissection for head and neck cancers, and also for LVEAL, that is a lateral video endoscopic inguinal lymphadenectomy, a modified technique for groin lymph node dissection. He's a well-known orator and a speaker, and he has numerous publications. He has also received multiple awards, including the Times Health Excellence Award of 2018 for his contribution to surgical oncology. He also won the Best Video Award for laparoscopic low anterior section at ACOS in 2016 at New Delhi. He also won the Pampana Gowda Video Award for the minimally invasive neck dissection at the Karnataka chapter of the ASI in 2016 at Shimoga. He also won the Competitive Video Award for Youngsters, second prize for Whale at NatCon in September 2015 at Bhubaneswar, India. He also won the Global Excellence Award in October 2013 at Bangalore, India, and the prestigious Detroit International Fellowship for Oncology. Welcome, Dr. Sandeep Naik.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Elvis, as Dr. Baiju said, you will be introducing Dr.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll just do that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, good evening. I'll be introducing the speaker. It's Professor Dr. Shailesh V. Srikhande, sir. The sir does not need any introduction. His name is synonymous, almost synonymous in India with pancreatic surgery. He's the Deputy Director at TMH Mumbai and also the Professor and Head of Division of Cancer Surgery at TMH Mumbai. He's a Chief of GI Surgery and HPB at TMH. His academic journey started in Mumbai in 1989, where he did his MBBS, and he passed out with flying colors, having multiple distinctions and merit certificates. He then passed out his MS General Surgery from Sion Hospital in 1997, where he was nominated for the Best Resident Award, and he also had scored the highest marks in the university. This was followed with a fellowship in the Department of Visceral and Transplantation Surgery at Bern, Switzerland, where he worked under the guidance of the doyen of pancreatic surgery, Dr. W. Buchler. This is also followed by a fellowship in GI and HPB surgery at the Tata Memorial Hospital from 2001 to 2002. He then joined the same hospital as consultant GI surgeon, and followed by a specialist training in pancreatic research and surgery at the prestigious Heidelberg Institute in Germany. From 2010, he has been working as a professor of surgical oncology at Tata Memorial Hospital. Has received numerous awards and accomplishments which run into pages, and I've only tried to minimize and get as many as possible in the time provided. These are the most important awards I have held, including the recipient of the J.N. Tata Scholarship for Higher Studies Abroad and Ratan Tata Travel Scholarship Award. He also won the best award for the best presentation at the 50th meeting of the International College of Surgeons in 2004. The paper was the role of D2 lymphadenectomy in gastric cancer. He was awarded the Kenneth Warren Fellowship by the IHPBA in 2005. He was the first Asian to win the award. He was also awarded Doctor of Medicine Magnum Cum Laude at University of Heidelberg in Germany in 2006. He has also received honorary fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons in 2014. He is the present president of the Indian chapter of the IHPBA and the past chairman of the scientific committee of IHPBA and president-elect of the APHBBA. He has published more than 270 clinical and basic science papers in leading journals, the H-index of 37. He has delivered over 550 invited lectures and orations worldwide. He also has participated in 52 masterclass live demonstrations on pancreatic, gastric, colorectal surgeries. He has contributed 60 chapters and edited 4 books on GI and HPB cancers. He's a chairman of the ICMR Committee on the Management of Pancreatic and Gastric Cancers in India. He's the only Indian to be featured in the International Study Group of Pancreatic Surgery, ISGPS. And as sir mentioned, in 2021, he has been given the honorary fellowship of the American Surgical Association, ASI. He's the second Indian and the first cancer surgeon to be given this prestigious award. Welcome, Dr. Sinha. Welcome, sir.
Welcome.
Good evening.
And congratulations for the convocation as the member of fellow of American Surgeons Association and as the president-elect of ASPBA.
Thank you so much, Baiju, and I should once again thank the Senadipan Education Foundation. I should thank Dr. Elvis. I like his first name. Not that I don't like his second name, but thank you for an exhaustive and rather embarrassing introduction, and good to see my colleague Sandeep as the moderator and so many of you here that I can see. So the brief given to me is to speak on cystic lesions, cystic neoplasms of the pancreas. So I'll start my screen share, and I hope you are able to see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Are you able to see the screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we can.
How many minutes do I have to speak before we have the question and answers?
40 minutes, another 40 minutes for question and answer.
Fantastic. Okay. So cystic neoplasms of pancreas, I'm showing you an old slide because not a lot of that has changed. Cystic tumors constitute about 10% of cystic lesions of the pancreas. So it means that the vast majority of cystic lesions of the pancreas are actually not cystic tumors. So though we are predominantly an oncology group here, but we also have a lot of GI surgeons who would do a lot of benign disease. I'm sure they would also appreciate that only cystic tumors constitute about 10 to 15% of cystic lesions of the pancreas. And from that cystic tumors, you get about 10% of them, which would be pancreatic cancer or malignancies. I think there is some interruption. If somebody can switch off their audio. Right. So the natural history of this problem remains unclear. There are some participants raising their hand. Okay, fine. The natural history remains unclear. Evaluation and management continues to be debated, and that's the reason why on a Sunday perhaps we are all here trying to learn from each other. And long-term data has got better and better, but continues to evolve. So now I will share with you some cases, and some of you who might have attended any of my lectures, I pardon them in case some of these cases are a repetition for them. But I think they highlight what we deal with in our practice on a day-to-day basis. A 63-year-old, a senior judge, vague abdominal pain, no obstructive jaundice, no weight loss, very healthy, referred by a very well-known endosonography specialist because of this kind of a lesion for a solid and cystic components suggestive of malignancy. You can also see what has happened to the vein, and that's not a good situation in a patient who has some abdominal pain and these findings on EUS. And these are additional pictures where we got a CT scan done, and it was a cystic neoplasm with doubtful invasion of the superior mesenteric vein, portal vein junction. And I had already told you what are their findings on EUS. So in this case, we have gone ahead with a Whipple resection with portal vein resection. We had a little bit of trouble, some intraoperative bleeding due to some inflammation, but everything went fine, and the patient has done well for the past 6 or 7 years now. And the final diagnosis, unfortunately, was a serous cyst adenoma, but I should not say unfortunately, because it's fortunately for the patient that we have resected a benign cystic tumor. Now, when we do this, let's look at what is the natural history of serous cystic neoplasms. And I'm citing with you some of the seminal studies. There would be more studies as well, but this is the essence that you get from all the studies. 2,622 patients evaluated, and they were followed up. Out of that, 1,271 followed up beyond 1 year. And you can see that there was a 37% of them which increased in size at a growth rate of about 4 millimeters per year. In more than 50%, it was stable. And they also looked at some patients where it decreased. Even after 3 years, symptoms were in a very small proportion of patients in this large cohort of patients evaluated. And they did document 3 serous cystadenocarcinomas. The more important message that I wish to give you based on the previous example that I have given you is that site at diagnosis should not be used for taking decisions. Site is a different situation. You can see why I have not thought of a tissue diagnosis. This patient was counseled for the possibility of a serous cystic neoplasm versus a mucinous cystic neoplasm. Yet we did not go ahead with, and I must compliment the endosonography specialist also, that if your treatment decision is not going to change, there is no point in putting a needle because that also has its own set of complications as well as financial implications. So in this particular case, we have looked at the vein involvement, we have looked at his abdominal pain, we have counseled him, and without a tissue diagnosis, we have gone in more for the symptoms and less for the size. We have a number of patients who have lesions in the body or tail which are not involving any parts of the vasculature. There are no symptoms, and we have kept them under observation. This will happen as long as you have radiologists who will give you a convincing diagnosis of serous cystic neoplasm. The other area where you may think of resecting serous cystic neoplasms would be the association with VHL syndrome, which in a dedicated team one continues to see in marginally increased numbers. This is a very old case of 2001, which we published in 2004. So it's already 17 long years. And you should know that you should suspect this in von Hippel-Lindau or vice versa. They can come due to symptoms related to size. They will, of course, have history of other operations for the brain and the eyes, etc. And the association is in 15 to 30% of cases of serous cystic neoplasm. You can get in serous cystic adenomas, you can get a von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. So be aware of this entity. So I would say that for serous cystic, surgery is needed only in a minority. Once we know that we are good surgeons, we should be careful that we don't unnecessarily operate, and we can avoid operations in a number of serous cystic neoplasms, especially serous cystic adenomas. Microscopic or malignant transformation is the important word, is very rare. The indications for surgery would be when you are in doubt, as we discussed our first case, or obviously if there is recurrent pancreatitis or development of symptoms or jaundice, then of course we are justified in operating a serous cystic neoplasm. Or if you have a doubt that there is associated cancer, even then you would be justified in going ahead with an operation. Let's look at another case, a lady from Bangladesh, a young lady, around 2007, I think so. Cesarean section done 3 months prior, a single episode of documented upper abdominal pain, but otherwise no remarkable history. She was explored in Bangladesh and there was a pseudocyst in the pancreatic tail. They drained the pseudocyst and they took a biopsy, and she came to us with a drain which was a 14 or 16 size Foley catheter. And what was draining was persistent external drainage of about 100 ml of fluid per day. And you will see this is how the catheter drainage of this young lady was. You can see a little dilated collateral along the greater curvature of stomach. This is obviously at the DJ flexure. You can see the third and fourth part of duodenum and jejunum. So it was in the pancreatic tail, and you can see greater curvature as well. There was a single slide which was available for our pathologists to review, and their report was, we can't really comment much, but it's a low-grade malignant tumor in a lady who was otherwise healthy. We have done an open distal pancreatectomy, as you can see from this picture. Margin was free, and we did a distal pancreaticosplenectomy. We did not have to clear anything along the greater curvature of the stomach. That was only associated stranding and inflammation. So apart from this, there was no problem at all for removing that. And you can see that 45% of cystic tumors may be mucinous cystic neoplasms. Very often they are in the left pancreas, almost exclusively in the women. You can do a CT or an MRI, but I think CT is more widely available and surgeons are more used to CT scans. So I've written that CT is helpful. I would not try to do multiple investigations. One is good enough depending on your center and your comfort zone and convenience. And EUS is good not for diagnosis and surgery. And EUS is good if you are planning observation and you are not keen on offering operation. Then an EUS will help you, as I will discuss with you as we go ahead in this talk. You must think of a malignant change if you get radiologic or EUS reporting of thick walls, septae, calcifications, etc. For mucinous cystic neoplasms, always consider surgery. She was operated in 2007 and she's fine 14 years on a follow-up. Now, a little bit about MCN. They have a high malignant potential, and so the answer, unlike serous cystic, is not observation but surgery. Large tumor size, mural nodules, eggshell calcification are things which you should be worried about. Spleen preserving techniques should be avoided because remember, you may be dealing with an associated adenocarcinoma or early development of adenocarcinoma. So treat this like pancreatic cancer with complete radical pancreatic surgery. And what I'm telling you has started off from the Sendai guidelines and the number of guidelines that are available with the American Gastroenterology Association and so many other bodies around the world. But this work, I think we should give a lot of credit to Professor Tanaka, who has initiated this work. And that's why I have given some of the important publications as cited references. Now you can see here in terms of 5-year survival and 10-year survival, You have excellent long-term survival, but it does come down a little bit. And according to histology, the minute you have invasive carcinoma in a mucinous cystic neoplasm, survival comes down. But if you have only an adenoma or a borderline neoplasm, you can have excellent survival. So it's better to operate here rather than keep things under observation and sometimes operate later on. You will still feel it's a good tumor, but remember, some of them are likely to not have a perfect prognosis as you would like it with MCN. Now, more recent publication, suspected MCN, and the discussion is about surgery versus surveillance. This is published by the group from Verona, my friend Giovanni Marchegiani and Roberto Salvia, and of course, Claudio Bassi. This is his group. And you can see that they had this series of 229 lesions presumed to be mucinous cystic neoplasms before surgery. 160 out of these 229 were adenomas, but 10.9% were carcinomas. The others are solid papillary, invasive, non-invasive IPMN, serous cyst adenomas, 5 of them, etc. And they concluded that you should resect when you document mural nodules if the size is 5 centimeters or more, if the walls are enhancing. And you may observe mucinous cystic neoplasms provided you have a compliant patient and a patient who understands, and then you can observe these cases very carefully so that you don't have to subject them to surgery, which has its own set of problems. This is a good paper which I would encourage those who are interested in pancreatic cystic neoplasms to read it. It's recently published. Another case, and I remember this case very fondly, which I will tell you why later on, but a 14-year-old girl from Nairobi, large abdominal lump, weight loss, otherwise healthy, but clearly she didn't look good when she came to our office. She was opened in Nairobi for a planned Whipple operation, which was abandoned due to a superior mesenteric vein, portal vein involvement. The biopsy there was suggesting a neuroendocrine carcinoma or an adenocarcinoma. And you can see when we scanned her here, this was the kind of lesion she had. We could see the portal vein and the splenic vein, but we could not see the portal vein inferiorly, or rather the superior mesenteric vein. She had symptoms of pain, she had a large tumor, and the doubt was about neuroendocrine carcinoma or adenocarcinoma. And you can see one more cut or a section which told us that we had a complex vascular resection to be done. She was resected, and the diagnosis actually in this young lady was solid papillary epithelial neoplasm of pancreas. You can see here the bile duct in the bulldog, the divided neck of the pancreas. The splenoportal confluence is intact, but the superior mesenteric vein was completely occluded and bad. And this is not a vascular clamp. This is just a simple crushing clamp. So this was one of those cases where she has had retroperitoneal and other blood vessels which were taking things ahead into the liver, and she got a vein resection without a reconstruction, perhaps for the first time in Tata, where we have done a vein resection without a reconstruction. So these are uncommon spends that they can involve blood vessels, but we will share our Tata data with you because this is case done in 2006, and we will share with you our data 15 years down the line. You see one more patient where a senior surgeon has referred the patient to us for involvement of the vein. And this lady was operated in 2007. You go to the root of the celiac axis, that's the common hepatic artery, that's the splenic artery. The tumor, as you can see, was located on the superior border and posterior aspect of the pancreas. We had a control on the right side. There was no vein involvement. This was only impinging on the vein, and we could completely take it out from the triangle region. And she has also done well after median pancreatectomy and continues to do fine. So this is where the Tata Hospital data stands, and this number is now beyond 50, and we will hopefully publish when we approach 100, which we are. But here you can see that 24 out of our 50 resections were either borderline resectable or locally advanced. The size is something to be noted. This was one of the reasons the reviewers were happy for this particular paper in EJSO, that we had substantially large size of tumors. There were 10 vascular resections out of 50, one multivisceral, and in 5 we had to even do a total pancreatectomy. But the R0 resection rate can be very high if you are well trained in pancreatic surgery. The morbidity, because perhaps it's not aggressive cancer, more often than not, has been a little less as compared to, say, ampullary tumors or neuroendocrine tumors. Zero mortality and excellent long-term survival. So these operations should be done aggressively but carefully, and this is another cystic neoplasm of the pancreas. Let's move on to another case. 52-year-old, 57-year-old gentleman, vague upper abdominal discomfort, a businessman in North Mumbai, good appetite, no weight loss, as healthy as all of us are here in this session today, no comorbidities, and the general practitioner got some baseline blood tests which were normal, but the ultrasound abdomen reported a lesion in the pancreatic body. And these are the images that he came to us with. And you can see that you have a complex cystic lesion. They said it is abutting. This is the superior mesenteric artery, and this is the area where you get the formation of the portal vein as the splenic vein joins. And you can see a complex cystic lesion going beyond the neck more or less, and then going into the body, going towards the tail. And you can see the lesion again over here as well. And it was close to the origin of the splenic artery was what was reported. We have opened this patient up, and we have done a splenic vein and splenic artery was preserved in the red loop and the blue loop. Apologies if the light is not very bright, but what we could do was that we could do a median pancreatectomy. We stapled off the head side, and then we removed this tumor, and then we did end to side pancreatic jejunostomy, very much the way I have learned and we have continued to do in the last 20 years since my time in Switzerland and in Heidelberg. So it was a margin negative IPMN, and this is one of the earliest cases of IPMN documented in my career as a surgeon at the Tata Memorial. And this operation was perhaps done in 2007. So what we see further is that nowadays in modern times, you will also get situations where you get a lesion as tiny as this. This is a branch duct IPMN. And if they are asymptomatic, you can completely keep them under observation. But I've shared with you a slide of a patient who was getting 3 documented recurrent attacks of acute pancreatitis. And what he needed was an enucleation or a pancreatic resection. There was a lot of inflammation in his case, and the enucleation plan did not work. And in this patient also, we have done a median pancreatectomy, 2011, a young businessman, but he's absolutely fine for the last 10 years for having resected a branch duct IPMN. Now, when we speak of IPMN, there are practical approaches that we need in our practice, because you have a main duct IPMN, or you can have main and branched and communicating duct, and that would make it a mixed type of IPMN. So I think it's based on tumor localization, whether you do a partial, distal, or total pancreatectomy. But of course, do consider a lymphadenectomy because like you have the adenoma carcinoma sequence in colon cancer, we know increasingly that IPMN and pancreatic adenocarcinoma is a documented sequence on basic research and even data that is published worldwide. After we do that, we do an intraoperative frozen section. And if it shows disease at the margin, we clearly do completion pancreatectomy. If you get mild dysplasia, you need not go ahead with a re-resection. But for moderate to severe dysplasia, if otherwise things are okay, the best thing is to do a radical operation so that you are fine. But remember, this is mainly for main duct and mixed duct, not branch duct. In case of pre-existing diagnosis of adenocarcinoma in IPMN, prognosis is not dependent on the remaining IPMN tissue, and then the pancreatic remnant may be preserved. So for example, you have a pancreatic head cancer, which is an uncinate process, or a pancreatic head ductal adenocarcinoma, and your neck margin shows an IPMN. And if there is no dysplasia or it is mild to moderate, you need not go on just because the duct is dilated and end up doing a total pancreatectomy in a preoperative diagnosis of pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. There are implications of frozen section, and this is what I lectured at the Japanese HPB meeting early this year. So I'll take a little bit of time to explain this slide, but I think it's important to emphasize to surgeons the importance or the implications of intraoperative frozen section. It changes the extent of resection in 20 to 30% of patients and allows a perfect resection in 97% of patients. So it's important to have a pancreatic pathologist for doing frozen section on the day you are planning these kinds of operations. The percentage of concordance between frozen section and definitive examination of the margins can range as low as 57% to 99%. It again tells us that you need dedicated pancreatic pathologists with an interest in IPMN. Then you can start to see things differently than somebody who is not seeing more often or somebody who is not trained in pancreatic pathology. In branch duct IPMNs, resection margin analysis is to exclude the presence of the tumor, but extension of the surgical resection is uncommon. So you just want to do this if you want to exclude an associated tumor. In main duct and combined IPMN, frozen section is done to ensure the absence of main duct IPMN in this location. Pardon the spelling mistake there. Since dilatation of the main pancreatic duct and neoplasia of the duct lining are not always correlated. What does the International Association of Pancreatology guidelines suggest? When adenoma is present at the resection margin, no further resection is required. But if there is moderate grade dysplasia or high grade dysplasia, MGD or HGD, as well as invasive carcinoma at the frozen, then you think even of a total pancreatectomy. And sometimes de-epithelialized margin or denudation at the margin, don't think it is negative, consider it as a positive margin and go ahead with resection. Extent of surgery, there is a debatable issue, but I think I discussed with you in my slide previous to the last one about how you plan, how you locate, how you depend on intraoperative frozen, and then decide between partial pancreatectomy versus total pancreatectomy. When it comes to recurrence after pancreatectomy, we don't have convincing data that total pancreatectomy is a must. And that's why this issue continues to be a little bit controversial even now. Also remember that we are not only looking at pathology and radiology and our surgical capabilities. This picture on the right upper corner of my slide is the picture of a father of a senior chest physician in Mumbai. And this was being treated as chronic pancreatitis, which is also common in India. And this was being treated as main duct or dilated CP in a patient who is otherwise asymptomatic. By the time he came to us, he had florid adenocarcinoma. This was the kind of picture. We could not offer him any sort of resection on radiology already. We missed out on a chance of a cure in the father of a specialist doctor at home. So IPMN is a slow growing disease of the elderly. Remember this. It carries a great prognosis. You may debate about partial or total, but if you feel that it's main duct or mixed duct, you must be aggressive because actually this is the best chance to prevent pancreatic cancer and the poor prognosis of pancreatic cancer. This gives you a great window to actually avoid pancreatic cancer and give these patients a chance to live very long, if not have a cure. Of course, strike a balance between endocrine and exocrine pancreatic insufficiency when you plan these surgeries. And based on what you have done, we can keep on discussing about how we follow up. But this I will keep it perhaps for the discussion section of this talk. So it remains a complex entity. Early disease, elderly population, big spectrum of malignant transformation, low-grade dysplasia to invasive intraductal papillary carcinoma. They clearly have the potential to harbor and develop PDAC. They give us the window to treat at an early stage. Post-operative complications can be high because of old patient and soft pancreases, and the operative treatment is invasive. That's why the controversy between observing in surgery on one hand and having a malignancy versus not having a malignancy. So we continue to have troubles with treatment guidelines, which continue to be confusing sometimes and incomplete, and there are generalizations which are involved. When do you definitely consider a total pancreatectomy? Diffuse main duct involvement, think of total. Persistent high-grade dysplasia, think of total. A family history of pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, if it is present, then it's important to think of total pancreatectomy in patients with IPMN, even in the remnant after partial resection. Pancreatobiliary type of IPMNs usually affect the main duct and demonstrate high rates of high-grade dysplasia, higher rates of malignant transformation, and higher chances of recurrence also, even when resected as non-invasive. So pancreatobiliary type is a word which I want the audience to remember. That will also help you to plan more aggressive surgery. And the established risk for recurrence and or cancer in these patients makes the morbidity of total pancreatectomy more acceptable in the modern world, where we have better chances to manage endocrine and exocrine problems. A few more slides before I close this talk. This is an EUS, and when would we do an EUS with FNA and fluid analysis? We would do it for diagnosis, but I use the word selectively and only when the plan is to observe. My endoscopy colleagues may not like this statement, because normally if you see a lesion like this in the pancreas, a vast majority of them are referred for endoscopy. But I think lesions which require surgery, the surgeon must be involved in the decision making early in the process while having or while running a pancreatic clinic. So you will have situations which are like these: low amylase, low CEA, low viscosity, negative mucin stain or glycogen rich cells, and it is serous cystic neoplasm. Low amylase, high CEA, high viscosity, positive mucin cells or mucinous cells and mucin stain. This is mucinous cystic. High amylase, high CEA, high viscosity, then you are dealing perhaps with an IPMN. So you can help and read your EUS reports and guide your endoscopists as to what you are exactly looking for to make a practical decision when you treat your patient of a cystic lesion in the pancreas. Little complicated slide, but I won't ask you to pay attention into too many of these. There are other tumor markers which are evaluated. Even we don't have too much of experience in our own place beyond CA19-9, CEA, and amylase. But do look at what happens in MCN. It is the CEA which is high. In IPMN, it is CEA. In some parts of the world, maybe they look at 72-4, and you will also get amylase, which is high. And if you are dealing with acinar cell cyst adenocarcinoma, not a good situation, thinking it's a cystic lesion, but that's what you get. You will again get amylase high, but you will also get amylase high in a pseudocyst. So therefore, there can be cases where people confuse pseudocyst with IPMN, etc. Please remember this in your practice. We have compiled some data, which is not a registry, but we contacted some of the major centers across the country with some documented track record of work as well as publications. And we decided to put this data together. So we got centers from North India, like All India Institute, from Hyderabad, the Asian Institute, Amrita, well known in Cochin, GEM Hospital in Coimbatore of Palanivelu and Senthilnathan, Stanley, a very well-known teaching hospital in Chennai, Lakeshore again in Cochin, and we put our own data as well. And you will be surprised to see what we see, but we are actually not very surprised. A large number of tumors, at least in India, are solid papillary epithelial neoplasms. Women almost always, large size, and getting operated because the size gives rise to symptoms. So you will see that SPEN were 30% of these cases. 76 patients were serous cystic neoplasm. This can be because uncertainty of diagnosis, lack of availability of EUS, or symptoms due to SCN, that we have operated a fair bit of benign tumors across the country in these centers. Expectedly, it's good to see MCN, which is 33%. IPMN, I wish to highlight, is very low in this series. This means that we are still not aware of this entity. It also means we need to be aware both with our endoscopists and pathologists and not just as surgeons about this entity. And we start to see this more and more than ever before. Now, whether it's truly less in India as compared to the West, or whether it is overdiagnosed in the West and the Far East, I do not have data to speak with you with a lot of confidence, but I think the next 10 years will tell me more about what we find as regards IPMN. And you will also see that you get patients of adenocarcinoma, though they are cystic neoplasms. You will also see that more tumors are in the females, obviously because of the SPEN and the neuroendocrines and others. Majority in the body and tail, less in head, but fortunately the hospital stay in all these big centers was good. The mortality out of 433 patients was only in 3 patients with very acceptable POPF, biochemical leaks, as well as clinically relevant POPF. And these were the spectrum of operations that were done. You can also see less number of vascular resections that have been performed in this series. So we published this in Surgery because they liked, again, the median size of the tumor, and because there was no other data available on cystic tumors of pancreas in India. In the years ahead, we would be able to perhaps show more data as we start to document and do more work in our center. Now, this is the data which those who might have attended my talk last year, maybe they might have seen this graph, but this graph is also updated at the end of December 2020. Even in the pandemic year, we have managed to do 190 pancreatic resections last year. We had a little bit increase in mortality last year, a couple of them possibly due to COVID-related challenges. But we also had some other multivisceral and other patients who had a difficult time, and we lost some of them. Having said that, our mortality today stands for the last 700 odd cases at 2.77%, with a morbidity of about 28%. But for the entire series that you see in front of you, we have a mortality today which is 3.5 without any selection bias virtually for patients with an acceptable morbidity. But here I tell you that out of this large series, we have now got 149 tumors of cystic neoplasms of pancreas, which we have resected. We still have more SPENs, but there is an increase in IPMN, and the serous cystic are equal, where a number of them would get observed rather than resected. And then it's the mucinous cystic neoplasms. Vast majority of pure branch duct IPMNs would not get an operation, but of course, main duct IPMNs would get an operation as well. So despite a large database, our cystic neoplasms data is modest, but it continues to increase, and you can wait to hear from us in the next few years as we go ahead. I'm going to share some algorithms, one of which is very old, and then something more recently when I was invited by GI ASCO to write an editorial, which I'll share with you in the next slides before I close. So normally there would be an ultrasound if it has been done somewhere, and then usually a CT scan, if not an MR, but more often we see a CT scan. You have a diagnosis confirmed based on a CT scan, nothing like it. You can plan observation versus treatment. But if your diagnosis is not confirmed and you're planning observation, then you will have to add an EUS with FNA and fluid analysis and then decide what's coming out. On the other hand, you have CT scan and there is evidence of maybe chronic pancreatitis. Maybe there is a documentation of previous attacks of acute pancreatitis, and you do not know whether you are dealing with IPMN or pseudocyst. That is the time when you will add an MRCP to study ductal anatomy as well, in addition to a CT scan. And then hopefully you will be able to differentiate based on clinical history and MR findings between pancreatic pseudocysts and IPMN. If it's a pancreatic pseudocyst and you are still unsure, we would add an EUS even in these patients and then decide what's the best way to treat. So the points to remember would be that when you see a pancreatic cystic lesion, remember that in the absence of documented history of acute pancreatitis, beware of diagnosing a pseudocyst. You are more likely dealing with a pancreatic cystic tumor, which may be malignant, which may not be malignant. As far as possible, choose all-in-one imaging modality. Otherwise, there is no end to ultrasound, triphasic CT, MRI, MRCP, so on and so forth. We can avoid that and cut down the investigation modalities as well as the cost involved. Go for a perfect diagnosis only if you're planning to observe, and then you can counsel anxious patients better. But if you are anyway going to be treating them despite an uncertain diagnosis, don't keep on over-investigating your patients. You can afford to offer them surgery if need be, as long as your outcomes are good and safe and well documented over time. So develop such a practical approach when you deal with a pancreatic cystic lesion. When you are in doubt, if you are a specialist pancreatic surgeon or if you don't have pancreatic surgery, refer to a specialist center or a high volume center. You will get better results. Unless you are doing yourself with good results, then of course there is no need to refer to any specialist center. In these tumors, unless you are dealing with suspected cancer or in mucinous lesions or main duct IPMNs, you can definitely give them organ preserving resections like enucleations, uncinate process resections, median pancreatectomies, and other organ preserving resections. This was the expert editorial that I was referring to. Remember that in 2021, you should look at worrisome features as recurrent pancreatitis, a cystic lesion or a cyst size which is more than Mr. Mohammad Hassan, I think you need to make yourself, yeah, thank you. So the imaging should be a cyst size of 3 centimeters with an enhancing thickened cyst wall, presence of mural nodules, a dilated MPD between 5 to 9 millimeters, and there is some data even 4 millimeters, etc. can be a problem. Distal gland atrophy should be a worrisome feature. Associated lymph nodes should also be a worrisome features. The high-risk stigmata would be, of course, pain, jaundice, pancreatitis, duct more than 1 centimeter, mural nodules or solid components within the cyst, suspicious cytology or even positive, and cysts with significant malignant potential like MCN, main duct IPMN, solid papillary epithelial neoplasms, and even some neuroendocrine tumors which can be cystic. In all these cases, it is easy to offer surgery. So the right part of the slide tells you that there is no rocket science in offering surgery, but also remember the worrisome features, because a number of these are going to help you to decide between observation and offering surgery. This is the team at Tata Memorial, which I always show at the end of my talk, because this is always a part of a pancreas clinic and a multidisciplinary discussion. And here you see our surgical team, which is divided into 3 units, a colorectal unit, a hepatobiliary team, as well as a pancreas, gastric, neuroendocrine, and a GIST tumor team. You also see our GI pathologists, GI radiologists, GI medical oncologists, and GI radiation oncologists, as well as nutrition specialists and clinical trial coordinators. So this is all possible. The work that I presented to you is because of our GI and HPB team at the Tata Memorial. The actual surgical work, I think these are the 2 people I should thank, and that is Dr. Vikram Chowdhury, who ran the National Cystic Tumor Study and is working on some other areas as well, and Dr. Manish Bhandare, another excellent surgeon, both of them with me now for the last 5 years and doing excellent work, which has enabled us to raise the volume of work as well as the quality and documentation of our work. At this point, I will thank, this is Tata Memorial Hospital. Those who are passing through Mumbai or would like to spend some time with us, or if you are here for any reason, you are most welcome to write to me, and we would be very happy to see you, have you with us, as well as exchange ideas with you. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll close this talk, and now I'm available for all the questions and answers that we can have.
Thank you, Dr. Shailesh Srikant. A brilliant talk as usual. It's the most awaited lecture from you about cystic tumors of pancreas. Now I hand over the mic to Dr. Sandeep Nayak for proceeding.
Thank you, Baiju. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent talk. And as usual, in fact, your talks are always very good and very interesting to listen to. And it is your experience that speaks, and the clarity of thought that is very important when it comes to a difficult area of decision making, because pancreatic neoplasms are extremely difficult to diagnose and put in an algorithm that can make it easy and simple to manage. So in fact, your experience and your expertise in this really shows. We should take a few questions, because there are quite a few questions. Some of them we have actually.
Dr. Sandeep,
yeah,
there is some hand raise. You can see that in the chat box. Dr. VK Kapoor sir is there. He has raised his hand. He can start from the discussion from VK Kapoor sir.
Yeah, Dr. Kapoor.
Thank you, Baiju. Actually, I should thank you also for insisting that I attend, because I had some alternative social commitment. But it was a pleasure, as usual, to hear Shailesh. I think I can call him Shailesh because I'm much older than him.
Sir, of course. Sir, you will always call me Shailesh.
Yeah, so it's always pleasure to hear Shailesh, because he gives very clear delivery and very unambiguous and very useful take-home messages. So thanks once again, Shailesh. I have 2 questions. One is that in the first case which you described, if you had known pre-operatively that it is an SCN, would you have operated? Number 2, you want to take one by one?
Yes, sir. I will take the first one. As I specified, we actually knew that there is a doubt that it may be SCN, but the endosonographer, we trusted his homework, 1. 2, the patient had upper abdominal pain, which was not related to acid peptic disease or chronic atrophic gastritis or H. pylori. He had also undergone an upper GI with the same endosonographer. And 3, when there was a doubt and there was also vein involvement and the disease was localized, we decided that if it is MCN or something more than NCM, this is the chance to still do and get away with a complete resection. So we did an oncologic resection, and then in the end, it turned out to be SCN. So if I had a preoperative confirmed diagnosis of SCN only, even then, because of the vascular involvement and the upper abdominal pain, I would have offered him surgery for a lesion which was substantially large too.
Thank you. My second question is more philosophical. Because as you yourself pointed out, the decision making in these patients, whether to observe or whether to operate, is quite difficult at some time. So if you are observing a patient, what exactly do you tell them about the risk of developing malignancy during follow-up? And second, if you are operating, what do you tell them that the biopsy may turn out to be not so worrying?
Yeah, so I think we tell them two ways. We first obviously tell them that pancreatic surgery is demanding and carries a risk to life, one. And it is okay and very easy for me to justify a risk to life after pancreatic operation if the patient has a cancer, because the risk of not operating on a cancer is almost 100% there, while the risk of pancreatic surgery is about 2 to 3%. So that's the easy discussion with a patient with a proven cancer or a high risk of cancer. But if you are having cystic tumors where the cancer may not be there, but yet they are likely to benefit from surgery so that the cancer doesn't develop, we are very objective and honest with them that you may get a negative diagnosis, and yet we are subjecting you to a risky procedure, and that we are not gods, we are competent expert people, but we will still have problems in terms of risk to life in 2 people out of 100 for these lesions. Once they truly understand the disease biology and the disease behavior, as Marcus Buchler would say, that would sound very strong, but it comes from a center with good documented strong data. Or as my father would say, it's not a good idea to diagnose pregnancy with postpartum hemorrhage. So if you are having a risk of pancreatic cancer for which you are operating, it's better that you operate a little bit early. And this is not my statement. This is what I've heard from my father, because once you have a cancer, it's a fight, as you would know, sir. So I think we convince them well, we counsel them. Majority of them understand, but we give them also time. We say that I'm not going to operate on you tomorrow. If you want, you take a month or two, think about it. We have documented where you stand, and you must understand that some definite risk of malignant progression is there, and therefore we are offering you an operation, and they then accept it. Now, as regards the follow-up, sir, it would depend on what is the pre-operative or the final histology after surgery. But on a broad basis for all tumors put together, we would say every 4 monthly for the first 2 years, and then 6 monthly in the 3rd year, and then in the 4th and 5th year, perhaps once a year. And again, depending on the pathology, we may not even necessarily do repeated scans. If we are keeping somebody under observation without offering surgery, for example, branch duct IPMN or a serous cystic neoplasm, then in the first 2 years, every 4 monthly, we would do an MRI, to be honest, because they also get the confidence that there is no change in size. We tell them try to be with the same radiologist or the same team so that the documentation and the scanning techniques are truly comparative and not 2 different centers and 2 different machines with small, because for these patients, even if there is a small change in size, the anxiety levels can go very up. So I think we try to standardize that also. And then they are actually quite compliant, provided they have the chance to reach for treatment and care, and provided our initial consultations are in great details with them. For these patients, I need to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, making them understand the disease pathology and our reasons for operating versus observing and why they need to come up. So I think I also put the responsibility on them that if you don't follow up and then God forbid things are going wrong, then it's also your responsibility, not just the doctor's responsibility, and everything is documented on our EMR. So actually what I want to do in the next few years is also to look at our series of patients who have been only observed and how they are doing. It will take some time, but hopefully I will generate that data as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Shailesh.
Thank
The
you, sir.
purpose of asking the second question was to impress upon the younger surgeons and the students in the audience. Look at a person who's doing 200 PDs a year, who has done almost 2000 PDs, but how much he talks to the patient, how much he tries to explain to them. And that is what we should all be doing, especially in a situation like this, where we ourselves are not sure. as to what will be the correct method of treating. Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you once again.
Sir, thank you very much, but I must use this opportunity to just impress upon the audience that if there has been one tireless worker for Indian Association of Surgical Gastroenterology and one dedicated teacher for GI surgery across India, Dr. Kapoor is one of the few stars and luminaries across the country. And I must say that my first chance to speak at IASG as an invited young faculty 3 years after I joined Tata was VK Kapoor sir's invitation when he gave me a chance to speak on gastric cancer and invited me for the CME in Kochi. So 2004 Kochi, my first faculty invitation in IASG is because of Kapoor sir, and I will not forget that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you.
Dr. Anil Herur, you have some question, so please go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah, hi Shailesh. An excellent talk as usual, and I must thank Baiju for inviting you for this talk. I would listen to this talk the third time, I must say, Shailesh, and I'm not bored at all. And every time there's something new to take, and that speaks about your dedication and towards pancreatic surgery. Congratulations on also becoming the president-elect of the Asia Pac HPBA.
Thank you.
My question was, I am glad that you mentioned about differentiating between a cystic tumor and a pseudocyst, because we have come across patients who have been operated for a pseudocyst and a cystogastrostomy done already, like the second case that you mentioned where a drain was put. Now, in these situations where there is a adenocarcinoma, low grade, local peritoneal nodules, but no distant spread with the stomach being involved, what is your approach?
So
Thank you.
Thank you. In one of my earlier presentations, I actually have one more case exactly like this. And I can immediately bring that to my memory. A lady operated in Bombay Port Trust, BPT Hospital. Pseudocyst suspected. A senior well-known GI surgeon has operated and put a pseudocyst drainage, a cystogastrostomy. And she happened to be the wife of a police officer. And this was a low-grade tumor with some nodules now around and in the omentum. We went in and did a complete resection, which included a distal pancreatectomy and a partial gastrectomy as well. So the principles of oncology were pancreatic resection with pancreatic lymphadenectomy and requisite safe margin for the stomach. It was not necessarily a D2 gastrectomy, but that was not required. We had to completely excise the cystogastrostomy site and make sure that the stomach was fine. Add a gastrojejunostomy as well. And this lady has done very well. So a very important point raised by Dr. Heru because of the concern of pseudocysts, and this is why I mentioned in my talk that you may have even cases not just done as cystogastrostomy by surgery, but you will also have cystogastrostomies done by endoscopy. And I have cases where we have removed the stents which were placed across not one, but 2, 3, 4 stents and a diagnosis of malignancy. And in 1 or 2 of those cases, intraoperatively, they have sent for the frozen section. Those the surgeon has been aware that there is a doubt of malignancy and they have sent it for frozen. But the frozen report is different than the final histopath. So again, you need a dedicated pathologist with interest in that, because that can also change your treatment decisions. Because once in a while, you may have a real difficulty differentiating between a pseudocyst and something which is not a pseudocyst. But I think with modern imaging and investigations, we can differentiate before we operate on these patients.
Thank you.
There is another question regarding the same, case number 2. I think we'll just take that before we go to somebody else who has risen their hand. So it's regarding the, CA levels. Is it worth doing a CA level in a case where there is a drainage done? You have the fluid draining out. So would you have done, have you done a CA level in that to diagnose MCL?
No, to be very honest, in that lady also, if you realize there was a single slide of pathology and what we said was that there is a low-grade malignant tumor and she had a fistula of 100 ml of pancreatic juice and she was a young lady. And if you see the CT scan, I showed you a single image. It was very obvious that there was a cystic tumor and not a pseudocyst. She had no attacks of pancreatitis also. So I would have operated on this patient irrespective of the CEA. We did do a serum CA19-9 and a serum CEA, not fluid. And it was not conclusive, it was not diagnostic, but in any event, all these tumor markers are only complementary in decision making. In isolation, I would never use them for taking big major decisions to offer surgery, etc. But if I get 2, 3, 4 points, some worrisome features, some symptoms, some radiology, and then the fluid CEA by EUS is very high, then my conviction to be able to offer them surgery goes up. So these are small clues that you can keep on getting in difficult cases that will help you. So it's a complementary investigation.
Dr. Ravindra, you have some question?
So your audio is not heard.
You're muted.
You're muted. You need to unmute Dr. Ravindra.
Yeah, it's an excellent talk. I'm a gastroenterologist. We have met a couple of times. Yeah.
And a colleague of mine.
Yeah, we work together. Me and Sandeep work together in Fortis now. The issue is for a gastroenterologist or a surgeon, the issue is in your practice, which are the patients you are sending for an EUS FNAC? That is the question number one. And because most of the time in India, if it is in Bangalore or Mumbai, where the CT scans are good, they will give a report like mucinous cystic or an IPMN. Yeah. But the problem is most of the CTs which are done in outer places where the diagnosis is cystic neoplasm, or it may be then in that scenario, what is your approach? That is number two. And what exact cases you really ask for a EUS guided FNAC?
Right. So I'll take your number two first, because Tata being a referral center, 61% of the work that we get in my team is from outside of Maharashtra and outside of Mumbai. Only 39% is in Mumbai. I would also believe that vast majority of the good CT scans and anything more than 16 slice, one can actually get a lot of information. Now, if the CT scan is really done very badly and they don't even have a CD available with them, we will make them repeat a CT scan first. All said and done, a CT scan is machine dependent, and not everybody like Sandeep and me are lucky to have good endosonographers and gastroenterologists like you. So that's the second thing, that EUS is operator dependent also, unlike a CT scan. So a pancreas protocol triphasic CT scan would help us 8 times out of 10, even if the patient has undergone a CT scan in a small place or the CT scan has been done suboptimally. Now, when would I do an EUS despite a good CT scan? Is when, I get a 74-year-old lady and they say cystic neoplasm, or they say this could be serous cystic neoplasm or mucinous cystic neoplasm, and the lady is completely healthy, but she has maybe obesity or diabetes or hypertension, etc. In such cases, I want a diagnosis between serous cystic neoplasm and mucinous cystic neoplasm, not only to convince myself that I should observe, but also to reassure the patient that most probably you have a negative diagnosis that is serous cystic, and we have got a good CT scan, we have got a good EUS, and we've got a good EUS fluid analysis to justify observing the case rather than operating. On the other hand, it might also mean that despite a high quality CT scan, you do a great EUS and you come back to me and say, I see 1, 2, 3 high risk features, etc. And then I will tell this lady that despite your comorbidities, despite your problems, I'm sorry, I can't keep you under observation. You require a Whipple operation, which has a risk, or you have a major pancreatic resection, which carries a risk, but we should do it because you have a documented MCM. So I think it goes in individual cases. In straightforward, good quality radiology cases, you may not require. But most often, when I have to differentiate between serous cystic and mucinous cystic, I need that. Sometimes I need it for the branch duct IPMNs, especially if they are asymptomatic or part of the main pancreatic duct or mixed duct IPMNs. In those kinds of situations also, we may add it. And the last entity is, of course, a pseudocyst, but there again, I would depend on history and MRCP more than any US. For solid papillary epithelial neoplasms, I think our radiologists all over the country are good and they will tell you, and we do no tissue diagnosis. In fact, I've had to face problems where EUS has been done and a needle has been put, and then people have had hemorrhage inside with abdominal pain afterwards. And then the girls who was going for an exam, we had to delay her, and then we had to wait, and then we had to operate on a larger tumor because there was a hematoma inside. Now, if you are decided to operate on a young lady with solid papillary epithelial neoplasm, with good CT, I don't need an EUS. We also do an EUS, since you're on the subject of EUS. If you are planning neoadjuvant treatment in a pancreatic tumor, I must have that. And even in neoadjuvant approaches for cystic neuroendocrine neoplasms, I need it because I need to know the grade of localized neuroendocrine tumor, to decide adding a DOTA scan versus an FDG PET, to decide between giving PRRT and chemotherapy based on WHO grade 2 and higher grades of 2 based on WHO 2017 classifications. Those cases also I would require an EUS if I'm planning some other non-surgical neoadjuvant treatment approach.
One last thing, sir, is it because what as an endosonographer, what I feel is serous cystadenoma and mucinous cystadenoma, almost 99% of the time we can differentiate. The problem comes only when we are going to follow up. That is side branch IPMN versus MCN. That too, the size between 3 to 5 centimeters.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is the only criteria where it is between 3 and 5 centimeters. A branch diet IPMN you would like to wait, and you have a doubt regarding MCN.
Yes.
And I think it is the only scenario where we should put a needle, and rest of the cases, I think the diagnosis is very clear.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There is another question regarding US over here in the chat box, which is about, can there be a confusion in the US biopsy because of mucin from the gastric or, duodenal mucosa? Can it be there?
It can be, and again, that would depend on the quality of your pathologist, who will tell you unequivocally whether we are in that area or whether we are not. So if many a times, I mean, I've not looked at data, but many a times, despite an EUS being done, despite fluid analysis, despite biopsy, I'm still left with a confusing picture, and we still have to take a decision. So this does happen. And I don't know, maybe the endoscopists themselves would know what are the best technical ways to avoid these kinds of challenges, to make it easy for the pathologist to report.
Yes.
It's important that we give clinical and other radiologic feedback to our pathologists when we send a sample there. In some of these difficult cases in our pancreas clinic, I literally pick up the phone and speak to our pathologists that this is the age, this is the problem, this is the radiology, this is plus minus, I'm thinking, observe, operate. What do you think? Benign, malignant. It also enables them to see things differently and give you a more practical pathology opinion as well.
Absolutely. Dr. Mohammed Yunus, you have a question?
I also see Professor
Yes, sir.
Rajan Saxena's hand
Dr.
is raised.
Saxena is, he's on also. So I think we'll let
Rajan sir is here. Good
Dr.
evening.
Yunus has kept, come on.
Sure.
Sir, I'm Dr. Mohammed Yunus from State Kashmir Institute of Medical Sciences. Thank you.
I can't hear you, Mohammed. Can you speak loudly in your mic?
Yes, sir. So thank you, Dr. Shailesh, for a wonderful talk. So we all are our role model for our younger students. So my question is, what is the indication for skin preservation in MCNs?
I could not get your question, Mohammed. I think your audio is not clear to me. If you can speak loudly and consistently in the same microphone.
So what is the indication of spleen preserving surgery in case of MCN?
No. So
What
my answer is,
I'll put it, I think
I got the question. I got the question. The role of spleen preservation in MCN. So
Yes,
I
sir.
mentioned in my slide, not a great idea, because I showed you the Kaplan-Meiers of the good studies, that if you completely remove the pancreas like an oncologic operation, almost 100% people are alive at the end of 5 years or even 10 years. So that is because we have done an oncologic operations, and you will discover a number of patients who will have a small or an early adenocarcinoma in an MCN. So better to treat an MCN thinking it is a cancer and not think of doing spleen preservation. In any event, I must tell you, a lot of practical discussion goes on about spleen preserving versus non-spleen preserving. You very well know that after the age of 18 or 20, the relevance of spleen itself is something which is questionable. I'm sure you in your training days have also operated a number of traumatic spleens and done splenectomies, and patients do well. So at such times, very often we are also doing technical operations because we are all surgeons and we love to do nice things with our hands and different things. But in these cases, if it's a mucinous lesion, don't think of spleen preserving, just do a radical operation like a cancer. You are doing better for the patient and not taking a chance.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Rajan sir, please go ahead.
Hi, Shailesh.
Good evening.
Thank you for an excellent talk on the subject.
Thank you.
I have questions for you. Let me take this more complicated one first. Patients who have cystic tumors and who are wrongly treated outside as pseudocysts with either a cystogastroscopy done or a drain, as you showed from the patient from Bangladesh, placed in that, and when they come to you, we have had 3 such cases in the last 30 years. We have resected them, oncologically resected them, but the results of long-term survival are dismal there. One patient lasted barely a year, another was 3 years, and the third one was completely lost to follow-up. An elderly lady, I don't blame them for that. What has been your experience on these revised resections in patients who have been maltreated, cystic tumors of the pancreas?
So to be honest, we are just now in the process of evaluating our 149 cystic neoplasms of the pancreas. And honestly, I don't have exact figures or data. The few cases that we have resected, we have been fortunate enough that they have come to us soon after. And at least on CT scans, they did not have gross or bad disease, but the path report was a pseudocyst drained and cancer is seen. So we have operated on them. And I cited that example when I responded to Anil Heru's question that we have a police officer's wife, which immediately comes to my mind, and she's done well. But on the other hand, I should also tell you that you are right, that you have had patients who have lived for 1 year and you had patients who lived for 3 years. Obviously, the one with 1 year had a more aggressive cancer, or you have intervened later after the patient came to you with a gap, one possibility. But the other patient lived for 3 years. Now, I don't know whether it was already development of pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, or this was just diffuse dissemination due to handling of the patient of a pseudocyst when there was a cancer. So obviously, we would have a number of patients who would not necessarily live long. But on the other hand, for example, if you have to offer something to these patients beyond surgery, you don't have much of a chance. So like lap chole done for CA gallbladder, the earlier you go in again and do a radical surgery gives you the best chance. You will have some who will live long and you will not have all who will live long. Same way for cystic neoplasms inadvertently operated as a pseudocyst. If they are resectable, please go ahead and offer surgery, and then we hope for the best.
The second question, SCN, symptomatic versus asymptomatic. Confirm that, I mean, there's no doubt about the diagnosis. And you have a patient who is scared about follow-up. I have several patients who have come and twice they have forced us to go in and operate, or they start running to other centers. What is your approach in these cases who are hell-bent? No, I can't live with a tumor inside my abdomen.
So, sir, I think we are honestly telling them that yes, you are hell-bent and we understand your anxiety, but you are completely asymptomatic. And
they're not asymptomatic.
Yeah, they are symptomatic.
They're not completely asymptomatic. I mean, you have.
They are symptomatic.
Symptom in the form of pain.
Yeah. So
and
if there
pain,
is,
which the gastroenterologist has been treating with PPI.
Right, sir. Sir, if they are symptomatic, size will not matter, and you are justified in operating on a serous cystic neoplasm. They should know that the final histology will be a benign one, And they should know that when you're offering them an operation, especially a Whipple, they will still be whatever your audited mortality of your team, 2%, 3%, whatever it is. I just tell them that, because for people to accept the risk of mortality with a negative tumor is the time where I spend the most time counseling them well beforehand, before I get them admitted and operate on them.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good to see you anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajan sir.
I think Dr. Kalai Selvan.
Dr. Kalai Selvan, I see your raised hand.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Dr. Kalai Selvan. I'm a practicing surgeon in Krishnagiri from Tamil Nadu.
Hi.
It was a very nice talk, sir.
Thank you.
Surgeons like me, I trained from Vellore CMC. I do a lot of gastro work, and recently last week I had an IPMN. I did a distal pancreatectomy, splenectomy. So I just want to raise a question about regarding the nodal dissection, sir. What would you prefer, like what station of nodes, like distal pancreatectomy, level 10 or level 11 group of nodes, or in proximal ripples, what the level of nodes you have to remove if it's mucus or IPM?
So there are two types of distal pancreatectomies. Have you done a RAMS, in the sense you have divided the pancreatic neck and then removed everything to the left of the neck, or is it just a tail removal, or what was the extent of your distal pancreatectomy?
It's up to the next. It's up to the next, sir.
So then you need to, I'll start off by telling you, you need to remove station 8 and 8P. Unless and until you remove station 8 and delineate the common hepatic artery, you will not be able to delineate the pancreatic neck and the portal vein as it goes beyond, superiorly above the pancreatic neck. So I invariably have to bare the hepatic artery and loop it up, expose the portal vein. That automatically ensures you remove 8A and 8P. Then you divide the pancreatic neck, and then you would do RAMS 1. I won't go into details as to what is RAMS 1 and RAMS 2, but you are dealing with an IPMN, so the posterior pancreatic capsule is okay. And then you would go by dividing the neck of the pancreas to the left of the patient, and that would mean you would clear along the celiac axis left gastric artery entirely, amas with the splenic artery division. You would do a radical RAMS 2, which would do a complete template removal. If you want to know the details of exact stations to be removed, I advise you to read the ISGPS paper. I've been a part of that study, and that's published in Surgery in 2014 in terms of extent of lymphadenectomy for pancreatic cancers and tumors. You will get all information about doing the lymphadenectomy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Write to me. I can send you the paper by email. I have it on the PDF somewhere on my computer.
Surely, sir. Surely, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. You share your mail, I'll just get in and respond to you, sir.
How was the margin? Let me ask you. You are telling me about IPMN and distal pancreas.
I had a good.
Was this mixed duct? What was the margin at the neck? What did your intraoperative pathologist frozen section tell you?
Yes, sir. I got the report yesterday only. Actually, I had a margin of more than 2 centimeters. Actually, it was in the tail of the pancreas. I didn't want to give a chance. Because as you were discussing about preserving the spleen, I didn't want to take a chance. I discussed with a few of my colleagues in Bangalore, Dr. Srikanth and Dr. Nagaraj Palankar and all. They told better don't preserve the spleen.
Good, very good. But I'll ask you one more question. How old was the patient, and was this patient a diabetic pre-operatively?
Nothing. The patient was not a diabetic. Patient had persistent vomiting for the past 2 months. He had persistent vomiting, roaming around several hospitals around Krishnagiri. It's a place near Bangalore, 90 kilometers from Bangalore.
And now the next question, is the patient a diabetic now? Because I gave you in my lecture one more thing. Complete lymphadenectomy, get worried about cancer, pancreatic enzyme and pancreatic endocrine insufficiency. 4 things.
Yes, sir. Patient has become a diabetic. He's on insulin now. He's on insulin now, sir.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well done. Well done.
He's on insulin, sir.
Here, I'll add one more question to you. So when you do a central pancreatectomy, do you anastomose both the sides or only one side? How do you manage?
I have predominantly closed the patient side unless you have a problem at the papilla or ampulla, which you have known beforehand. Otherwise, we close it either with a stapler or with a hand-sewn closure by identifying the main pancreatic duct and doing a fish mouth. So on the head side or on the duodenal side, we close. And on the other side, we just do a conventional end to side duct to mucosa 4-layer pancreatic jejunostomy. Sometimes the loop is joined to the pancreas on the left, and the other part of the loop, we just buttress the serosa to the pancreatic remnant which has been closed. So it's like a U which is just fixed there, but there is no anastomosis. Once or twice I have done an anastomosis on the other side when I thought that the pancreatic duct was of a good size. So I felt it is better to also drain here, and it is low risk. Because remember, even a median pancreatectomy carries a risk of mortality. You have activated enzymes, and instead of a one weakness of one anastomosis, you can have two weaknesses with two anastomosis. So again, an intraoperative decision, but more often than not, I close the pancreatic stump, and on the other side, we would join it.
I think there's a question on total pancreatectomy and the sequelae, especially the endocrine and exocrine, both the sequelae, how do you manage?
So I think more than management, the biggest thing is to understand what is the financial situation of the patient. Again, long-term counseling. They need to be aware that even with generic Indian pancreatic enzyme replacements, people run the risk of 7, 8, 9, 10,000 rupees per month, because with every meal they will have to take pancreatic enzyme replacement. So if somebody is just not financially in a position, you really have to rethink about offering a total pancreatectomy. And there are a number of patients where we would first tell them to think about organizing their finances in a way that their initial 5, 6, 7 years are taken care of financially, so that they can manage the pancreatic enzyme insufficiency, which will happen from day one after you do a total pancreatectomy. I think endocrine deficiency is not a big problem. We have much better control of diabetes. We have much better awareness of blood sugar and its challenges. We have very many good physicians who can manage diabetes well. And with good patient counseling, we've not had a major problem for those patients who have got a total pancreatectomy for management of endocrine problems. The exocrine problems and the finances, that are involved clearly are something that we need to plan beforehand. Otherwise, it just becomes very difficult to deal with it afterwards. So good counseling is important.
Dr. Nagasatya Sai Kumar.
Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I don't have any question. I have just attended the lecture lately, and so I need to know whether it will be available on YouTube or any other platform to attend it. That's it.
That will be available in the YouTube channel of Janadiban Education Foundation from tomorrow onwards.
Thank you, Baju. Send me the link also. I would also value to see my
Thank you very much,
lecture.
Sure. That will be available.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Ibrahim.
Yes, Amar Ibrahim, hand is raised. Yes.
First of all, I would like to thank you for this elegant lecture.
Thank you.
I only have one question, please.
Yes.
I am Dr. Amr Abul Magd, lecturer of gastroenterology from Egypt.
Yes. Good to hear from you.
Thank you. I still like to ask about the role of surgery in segmental IPMN.
Yes, you have a role, because I think if the main pancreatic duct is involved, or if it's a mixed duct IPMN, I showed you the picture where I evaluated the margins, not just proximally, but also distally. And this patient has done well for more than 10 years. Again, the picture which I showed as my case number 4, that he was 57 years of age when I operated on him. Today he is 67 or 69. He had an IPMN, which was a mixed duct IPMN in the part of the distal part of the neck and the body. And again, it was not there in the tail. And there you are justified if you get your frozen section and final histology as negative, you are completely justified in doing a segmental resection. On the other hand, one of the earlier speakers, you heard him who asked a question, this young gentleman from South India, that he decided to do a distal pancreatectomy because the lesion was more in the tail And then, of course, there is no question of doing a segmental resection. So I think it's the location of the pathology and the extent of resection that you require and the quality of intraoperative analysis of the margins that you have that will dictate what is best offered to the patient, both in terms of oncology as well as quality of life.
So, yeah,
Thank
if
you.
any more questions are there, please raise your hands. As I go on, I'll be taking those questions. Dr. Rohit, could you ask your question, please? Dr. Rohit. Dr. Rohit Mudadla? Could you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, thank you for the great and inspirational talk. I would just like to know what will be the protocol for recurrent MCN or once it's operated. What's the guideline for that? Or when to intervene and when to do a resurgery for that?
No, if there is any recurrence and if it is localized recurrence, earlier you go in, the better. And you also, if you have only done the operation, you need to introspect whether it was a field defect giving rise to a recurrence or whether you had an intraoperative decision where you have inadvertently gone close to the tumor and therefore it's a local recurrence. But if you have localized recurrence, whatever the recurrence, the best would be to go in early and operate because that's the best chance for them to live long.
Is there any role of chemo RT if it was positive like pancreatic adenocarcinoma?
No, not for MCN and not for, I mean, there is no convincing data. There are people who would try, but remember as a surgeon, chemotherapy and radiotherapy are good adjuncts to radical and complete surgery. If it's metastatic, if it's involving big arteries, then you have no choice but to think of non-surgical approaches as a first approach. But if you are having disease which has not got major vascular involvement and it is localized, please, please, please do not depend on chemo or radio. Go in again. They are more difficult operations, but that's the best chance for them. And you can again go in a safe, clean area and do a resection.
How frequently will we follow up for MCN cases? Or what will be the follow-up?
So the follow-up answer I gave in the early part of the question answer session, we normally follow up every 4 months for the first 2 years, every 6 months in the 3rd year onwards. And then depending on the underlying pathology and the risk of recurrence, maybe the 4th and 5th year is once a year or once in 6 months. And that's how we would be. But first 2 years, we would evaluate them every 4 months just to see both our quality of surgery, their quality of life, reassurance to them, as well as the pathology, whether whatever we reported in pathology is getting correlated well on the follow-up or not. All this is important to see as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was, Dr. Fedi Al-Hussein, if I am pronouncing it right, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, sir. Are you
Hi.
hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for a great lecture. I am grateful for you. Sir, my question, except of unfit patient for surgery, are there any criteria for unresectable cyst, especially this is cystis, not adenocarcinoma, give metastasis? Is there any criteria for unresectable? Thank you very much.
I think cystic neoplasms are, as compared to conventional adenocarcinoma, cystic neoplasms are better in terms of their behavior and the chance of long-term survival. So in fact, in cystic neoplasms, you should try to operate as much as you can. Vein resections, of course, can be done and reconstruction can be offered. It is the arteries which can be a problem. But the arteries are a bigger problem with pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. The arteries would be less of a problem for cystic neoplasms unless your cystic neoplasm is something like a grade 3 neuroendocrine cancer, etc., then you might have problems where the arteries can't be resected, so on and so forth. But my general advice to you would be that if it is localized cystic neoplasm, try for aggressive surgery as long as it is not some aggressive ductal carcinoma or cyst adenocarcinoma, which are extremely rare kind of situations.
So I have one question of my own. Right now, last week I was dealing with a patient wherein there was a pancreatic body tumor, cystic neoplasm, malignant in fact, invading the celiac plexus. In these situations, would you consider a surgery or would you manage them in some other way?
So when you say cystic neoplasm invading the celiac plexus, what malignancy is this? What did they say?
It was given as mucinous turning into malignant. So in fact, there is still workup is we are just completing it. In fact, interestingly, what had happened was she had a ovarian cyst which was operated. The operated cyst turned out to be a deposit, and then they came to us. Then we diagnosed the pancreatic lesion. So would you?
So you actually have a metastasis. So you have a Krukenberg. You have a Krukenberg.
But no. This is a metastatic case, but a patient who comes primarily to you without a metastasis, with just an invasion of the celiac plexus, would you consider?
So again, if there is frank invasion, you will have to document it. But if you get a good tissue diagnosis telling you that you have something targetable by chemotherapy and that we have something very aggressive, we would want to give some systemic treatment. But if you are not able to get a precise tissue diagnosis, if there is nothing really targetable by chemotherapy, then you would actually think of going ahead, because if it is only celiac axis but not involving the head and neck and the vein is not involved, it's a body tumor, you might be able to even do something like an Appleby or take it off the celiac axis, because what you see on radiology may be closely abutting, but with fine dissection or with divestment, you might be able to take it off the celiac axis, shell it out, and yet offer a resection and safeguard the celiac axis. But this would depend on a combination of patient's general condition, your pathologist being able to tell you definitively what cystic malignant tumor is this, how is the patient's general condition, the quality of radiology, and then you planning the extent. And you will be right sometimes in these cases, and you will not always be right in these cases. These are difficult situations.
Very selectively.
Yeah.
Dr. Chandra, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hello.
Hi, Chandru.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Sir, regarding one case scenario, just I want to discuss. A person with a distal pancreatic cystic and spleen, both a cystic lesion with ascites. When we tapped ascites, it was IMC 1100, and ultrasound gated aspiration from the cystic lesion in the pancreas and spleen, it was showing a CA of 19,000. And omental deposits, omental thickening also there. Ultrasound gated biopsy of the omental thickening showed a mucinous adenocarcinoma. Whether this patient any systemic, what treatment options for this?
So you treat this as adenocarcinoma with palliative chemotherapy because you have omental disease, you have ascites, and you have a cystic lesion which you have aspirated, and the omentum has shown you adenocarcinoma. I think this has to be treated as disease which is already gone beyond oncologic resection. You can technically do it, but you will not get long-term survival, which is beneficial. But you can clearly give, if you get more information, you can plan. But from what you tell me, you will be able to give them gemcitabine based or something like FOLFIRINOX palliative chemotherapy with a palliative intent. But you can always reassess them if there is excellent response, ascites is gone, and patient is going to come back to you after 6 months of good chemotherapy. You can always revise your intent. But just now the intent of treatment is advanced stage 4 adenocarcinoma and palliative chemotherapy and guarded prognosis. That's all for now.
Yeah. Okay.
Professor Rajan, I think you have another question. If there are any more questions, please raise your hands. Yeah, Dr. Rajan, please.
Ganesh, I want a word from you.
Yes.
Do you have facilities for training pancreatic specialist pathologists at TMH?
Sir, we have observer posts in pathology, and there are observers who can come and attend with our pathologists who are just doing dedicated GI and HPB. And within GI and HPB, we have 3 dedicated pathologists, and all of them are taking individual leads in some pathology. So if somebody is really interested, please ask them, or you can write to me on my email with whatever your intent or plan. And then they can come and spend some time in the pathology department in Tata as an observer, versus sometimes we have posts for senior residents. So it depends on who you want to come. If it's at a faculty level, I would advise that they come more as a observer, as a guest pathologist for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, I want to pick up a young faculty member for this job.
Sure, sir. They are most welcome. They can come as an observer, and unless there are posts available from your department where you allow them to go as a pool officer and you fund them, then they can also get a funded post which they can do in Tata. I don't know how it would be with SGPGI. That I don't know. But if somebody is interested, please do write to me, and I will forward it to the head of pathology. Talk to them, and we'll do our best to exchange ideas and these kinds of collaborations.
This is a very important thing. The frozen section of pancreas is the most difficult, one of the most difficult undertakings.
No, and even our synoptic reporting, whether it's gastric cancer, whether it's lymph node retrieval, grossing, pancreatic cancer, leads protocol, it's very much better and different than what it was 20 years ago in Tata. Much better.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Someone has asked about PET CT, role of PET CT.
No role of PET CT unless you are suspecting a pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, but a pure cystic neoplasm, if you have a standard CT thorax and a CT abdomen, there is no role for doing an additional PET scan. It doesn't add a lot of value to it. You are looking at some borderline resectable pancreatic ductal cancer, locally advanced pancreatic ductal cancer. The role for PET scan starts to come in more than for the standard cystic neoplasms that I discussed.
Just going through the chats to see, I don't see any other raised hands. So I'm just scanning through the chats to see any other.
So Dr. Jaypala Reddy has asked for any role for family screening in pancreatic cystic neoplasms. I must say I've not read of late something about familial screening for pancreatic cystic neoplasms. But if you deal with patients in your clinic who are on the younger side, we invariably refer them to our dedicated genetic clinic at the Tata Memorial. We have some evidence, not very high, for familial pancreatic cancer. Similarly, I don't think we have a lot of evidence for familial pancreatic cystic neoplasms. But admittedly, this year, I haven't done any reading for familial pancreatic cystic neoplasms. Thank you for the question. I need to study more to come back to you.
What is your experience about the metastatic ESPENS? Something which, we do
mixed experience. I've done young patients with a Whipple resection with a portal vein thrombus removal. I've done patients with Whipple with portal vein resection. And I've done patients with Whipple with thrombus removal and liver metastatic disease removal, which was 2 or 3 metastases. And these patients have continued to do reasonably well. But there are also a few, very few patients that we have seen where there is extensive disease in the liver, etc. And then it's a challenge because they are not chemosensitive, they are not radiosensitive. These are the patients where you need a careful tissue diagnosis, biopsy. You might even do next generation sequencing to find out any targets that you might have for medical oncology to consider. because then surgery becomes a problem if you have those aggressive metastatic solid papillary epithelial neoplasms of pancreas. But uncommon, that is for sure.
Dr. Sandeep, there is a question in the chat box regarding how to choose between central and distal pancreatectomy. How much remnant adequate to prevent endocrine insufficiency?
Sorry, what's the question?
I know to decide between central and distal pancreatectomy, how much remnant would like to have?
So there is no hard and fast rule, but I would feel comfortable if you have something like 5 centimeters or more than 5, I would want to preserve it. If there is going to be just a 2 centimeter bit of tissue, you can cut it and leave it as a pancreatic islet without doing an anastomosis. It might be okay and it will not cause some high pancreatic fistula. But if you have something like 5 centimeters or more, I would rather do a pancreas anastomosis. If you have something very less than that, you can remove it completely. I see, is that Dr. Jagannath? DJ to everyone. Is that a question from Dr. Jagannath, sir?
Not.
Okay. So there's a question from Dr. DJ to everyone. Is there an asymptomatic, if there is an asymptomatic cystic neoplasm in the tail, it's a specific question, and CT does not give a clear diagnosis, is this amenable to EUS and FNAC? Depends on the size, but very often it may not be. And then it is more important that you trust your CT. If required, add an MR with an MRCP, and then decide what you want to do for this cystic lesion in the tail of the pancreas.
Another question on what is the experience with open versus lap versus robotic, because you have robotic experience also, right?
Yeah, so I think cystic neoplasms, you have more evidence that you can do laparoscopic or minimal invasive pancreatic resections. You do not have a complex reconstruction which you have with Whipple's. So today you have more and more series which will say that doing a lap or a robotic distal pancreatectomy is as good or sometimes better. I think if the patient doesn't develop a post-operative pancreatic fistula after a distal pancreatectomy, which will happen in about 75% of cases, you will not get a post-operative pancreatic fistula. In those patients, the scar morbidity is gone. You can do a good distal pancreatectomy and you can remove the specimen by a fan and steel incision. And laparoscopy works as well as robotic. There is no evidence of superiority of one over the other. Robotic is good transition from open surgery if you have the robot, but it's more expensive. I'm clearly more comfortable with the robot, one, because we have it, and because I've been not a consistent lap-only surgeon for pancreas. We still do a large number of open operations, but if we do left pancreases, we are doing more and more minimal invasive. And you can do them well, especially if the size is not large, especially if you are well trained in lap pancreatic surgery like Dr. Baiju, and especially if it is not involving major vasculature. Remember, these are low-grade tumors, but the last thing you want is poor handling and rupturing these tumors, etc. This should not happen. This should be clean, low-risk, high-quality surgery. Whether you do open, lap, or robotic, doesn't matter. All of them are equally good.
Yeah, there is another question regarding confocal endomicroscopy.
What's the question about confocal endomicroscopy?
Can you see the chat box? Why don't you use Moray micro? Yeah, that is a question from Europe.
Europe is asking a question.
The question came at 9:19. You can see that.
So yeah, I see that question. Why don't you use Moray microforceps or confocal endomicroscopy to make a diagnosis? So to be honest, I think it is for my endosonographers to give this convincing answer as to what level of evidence you have, what's your sensitivity, and what's your specificity for making a precise diagnosis over and above everything else that is conventionally and more easily available. So if the question or the person asking the question is still there, I would request them to talk to us just now and either update us, or maybe I will tell Dr. Ravindran, who works with Sandeep, to give us some insights as to what's the data and the literature out there to justify confocal. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? I honestly do not know that.
Yeah, I unmuted him. Can you please go ahead?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Ravindra. See, Murray forceps is a new method wherein we can, especially MCN and IPMN, from the mural nodules with the EUS, you can go and take a biopsy. But the issue is the bleeding risk. And that is the only thing. But most of the time, it is for the patients who are between 3 and 5 centimeters between branch duct IPMN versus MCN, where you want to follow them up.
Sure.
That is the only indication we should use a Murray forceps. Coming to the confocal endomicroscopy, you need to just put a probe, and then you can differentiate MCN versus serous cystadenoma. But the issue is we may not, at this moment, it is not very 100% at this point of time.
No, but I think this is interesting. This is good to know that we have much better sensitivity and ability to detect and differentiate between MCN and SCN thanks to confocal. Is there a big issue as regards cost or something? If it is not, maybe we should start looking at it. I agree with you, but I don't know the data. I've not studied the literature to know it.
The cost is the problem. I think this is the cost in India.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, clear. I mean, I'm not sure that it's only in India. I'm sure the cost is there in Europe and America as well, for sure. Yeah.
I think there is a question on when do you manage branch duct IPMN operatively?
When do I manage, meaning if you have a symptomatic branch duct IPMN, you operate. If you don't have a symptomatic and only a branch duct IPMN without any communicating or main duct IPMN, you observe. So the only operations I've done for branch duct IPMN is enucleation and median pancreatectomy, and a couple of uncinate process resections or Whipple's resection where there was branch duct with main duct IPMN. So again, location of disease, patient symptomatology, risk of malignancy, risk of surgery dictates extent of resections, which I discussed in my lecture.
I think most of the other questions have been answered already. Dr. Baiju, do you see anything else?
Actually, I went through all the chat. Actually, all the questions have been answered.
Yeah.
So if at all any remaining questions are there, they can join the WhatsApp group. Just for 1 week, there is a temporary WhatsApp group. They can ask the same questions here in the WhatsApp group, and I will be conveying to Dr. Shailesh Srikante and Dr. Sandeep Nayak, and they will be answered.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Baiju. I enjoyed this platform once again. You have been kind enough to me that you hosted me once last year.
And that was actually, we went up to 10:30, 10:40.
Yeah, so you tolerated that trauma of 2.5 hours with me, and yet you had the guts to call me again. So I'm very grateful.
I'll call you again.
Thank you. I think we'll be happy to talk with you on pancreatic tumors, neuroendocrine tumors, gastric tumors, gastrointestinal stromal tumors. We have various options, but you decide. You are running an excellent program, and people are enjoying it all the time. I can see
Today
that.
we had 331 direct participants.
Fantastic. As always, it's a very good number, very impressive, considering that it's a Sunday and there are so many webinars all over the world. But you're obviously attracting a huge traffic, which is congratulations to you and your organization, as well as to Sandeep and everyone involved with the foundation.
No, I'm a moderator only in this. I was invited, and I'm very thankful to him for inviting me. It was it was a great pleasure to moderate this session and such an excellent talk by you. And good audience, 330 is a huge number, and it was very nice to sit around and moderate and discuss such an important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep and Dr. Shailesh and Dr. Elvis for the introducing the moderator and speaker. We will be coming again next week, Sunday, with the nutrition in surgery. by Dr. Adarsh Chowdhury. So till then, bye. Good night. Good night to all.
Good night.